are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, your host for Locked On Seahawks. Rejoining me after a long 4-day weekend, my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. Yesterday was not intentional. My travel schedule ended up hindering when we could record, so I had to ride it solo, but really happy to have Rob back. And I guess we can say this is both good and bad for our listeners. We're glad to have you tuning in, but you're going to get exposed to a little bit more intel coming out of the loss on Sunday for the Seahawks. So you're going to be exposed to a few more hot takes maybe here coming your way from Rob Rang. So it's going to be a jam-packed show. We're going to be closing up with some finishing thoughts on Sunday's loss in Minnesota, and we'll start to move forward to week 4. The Seahawks getting their first NFC West matchup of the year, going down to Santa Clara to play the 49ers in a tough road game on Sunday. So we'll share what's new with the 49ers heading into this divisional matchup. This show is brought your way by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. Now for your lead story here on Locked On Seahawks. As Seattle gets set to begin preparation for their Week 4 matchup against the 49ers, the team officially has waived quarterback Jake Luton. They now only have Russell Wilson and Geno Smith as the only quarterbacks on the roster. And they opened up that spot to sign Robert Nkemdiche to the 53-man roster. And this was a move that I thought was going to happen. I wasn't sure if this spot opening up was going to be the one that led to Nkemdiche signing, but he was elevated for his second practice squad to game day jump on Sunday. And per league rules, you're only allowed to do that twice before the player can't go back on the practice squad. So the Seahawks risk potentially losing him if they didn't sign him to the 53-man roster. And I haven't had a chance to look at the all-22 tape from Sunday's game against the Vikings, but the first game that Nkemdiche played against the Titans, there was a lot that I saw that I really liked, and there were some things in person that stood out. I saw a pressure on a bootleg from him in this game. I thought he has given them – I felt like he has given them a nice little lift as a reserve defensive tackle, and he's brought that energy that we saw during OTAs and early in training camp before he suffered a groin injury. So based on what Pete Carroll said yesterday, I fully anticipated we are going to see Robert Nkemdiche back in a Seahawks uniform for this upcoming game, and now he's back on the 53-man roster.
Yeah, and I think this is a net gain for the Seahawks, Corbin. I think that obviously Jake Luton as your number 3 quarterback was very, very unlikely to see the field anytime soon. And Robert Nkemdiche, the last 2 games, as you referenced, being active and playing and making some disruptive plays. One of the few defensive linemen who has made a few disruptive plays. So I think that it is a logical move. I think that it was one that the Seahawks had to make because, as you just mentioned, that he would have been eligible to sign with some other team, and you know, the difference-making interior defensive linemen are rare. Nkemdiche was drafted in the first round out of Ole Miss, a couple of years ago by the Arizona Cardinals for a reason. And this is a really super talented football player. Pete Carroll talked about during training camp. There were some plays that really, captured his attention, his imagination. And so I think that it makes a lot of sense. And then, of course, Jake Luton, I wish him well. But at the same time, I have not seen anything that suggests that he is likely to become a starting quarterback in the NFL, and certainly not in Seattle, where obviously the position is in good hands with Russell Wilson. So that has been a position that Seattle traditionally during the Pete Carroll, John Schneider era has only gone to 2 quarterbacks anyways. You feel good about Wilson. You feel good about backup Geno Smith. To me, that 3rd quarterback spot has always felt like kind of a placeholder spot anyways. And so if you are able to get a guy that you feel comfortable with in Nkemdiche, you have allowed him to kind of be that, kept that carrot in front of him to keep him motivated. That I think that's part of the reason why that he has been successful. To me, the big challenge is Nkemdiche going to continue to play at that high level? If he does, then I think that this is going to wind up being a real steal for the Seahawks. And I think that, the way that the contract appears to be, coming together, then I think that suggests that the Seahawks know that Nkemdiche needs to continue to play and needs to continue to have that carrot in front of him to be successful. And I think that they did so. And I do think that you are going to see more of an impact from Nkemdiche than virtually anybody else that might be available on the free agent market. I know there's a lot of people saying, oh, you should have signed Josh Gordon. Oh, you should be on the Richard Sherman train. All these different things. Nkemdiche has been off your team for the last couple of months. He knows what's going on. I think he can be somebody who can help right the ship.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned putting a carrot out in front of him because there have been motivation issues. There have been work ethic issues for him dating back all the way to high school. He's always been a big-time talent, but you haven't necessarily seen that talent translate to the on-field production that you would expect from a player of his caliber. He's had 2 pretty solid first games with the Seahawks, though, and you've got LJ Collier there who's been inactive 2 of the first 3 games, a healthy scratch. Right now, those 2 are going to be battling head-to-head for the right to be active on game day, especially with Kerry Hyder potentially being out this weekend with a concussion. Maybe you have both those guys on the roster because of that, but they are going to be going against each other one-on-one, week in, week out. You know LJ Collier's got to be frustrated that he's been a healthy scratch now twice in the first 3 weeks. And as a former first-round pick, there's got to be some pride in play here. He wants to play. So he's going to be doing everything he can at practice, and that's going to push Robert Nkemdiche because he's going to know week in, week out, I'm not guaranteed to dress for this game either. And so I think this is a great move for both sides. And I think you and I both agreed going into training camp that as long as Nkemdiche was healthy, there was a good chance he was going to make this team. He got banged up, so the Seahawks didn't have a chance to see enough of him to make the team, but they kept him around because they had faith that this is a guy that when he got healthy could have a positive impact on their defensive line. He's been able to play the 3-tech spot. He's played a few snaps as a big defensive end. He gives you some versatility, and I thought he played pretty well. Again, I need to see the All-22 film from Sunday to be able to really tell you how he performed against the Vikings, but I was impressed with what I saw against the Titans. And snaps on the field in person, he looked pretty decent on Sunday. You couldn't say that about a lot of Seattle's defense, but certainly he and LJ Collier right now, they are vying for snaps on game day against one another. And I right now personally think Nkemdiche has pushed in front of him. That's why he played last week against the Vikings and Collier didn't. So they're putting pressure on the first-round pick. You want to play? You need to earn those snaps on the practice field. And the same can be said for Nkemdiche. Hey, don't rest on your laurels. Collier's coming for those snaps. You need to keep bringing it. So it's that always compete mindset. As for Jake Luton, the Seahawks did open up a couple practice squad spots today. I expect they're going to try to re-sign him once he clears waivers, get him on the practice squad because you want to have that third quarterback around, especially in the COVID era, just in case. So I anticipate nobody else is going to claim him off waivers, and he's going to end up back on that practice squad, along with Jay Sternberger, the tight end formerly of the Packers, who is also signed today. When we come back in the second quarter, yesterday, Rob did not have a chance to dish out his thoughts on the Seahawks loss to the Vikings in Minnesota. Well, we're going to change that. Rather than our typical Throwback Tuesday segment, Rob's going to give 5 quick thoughts, maybe quick thoughts, and you know how we are on the show, on how the game unfolded on Sunday. You won't want to miss it. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're back and better than ever. All eyes are on the gridiron with teams back in action to start the football season. And as always, BetOnline is your top spot for all the pro and college football action this season with a new and updated site and a new interface, even more odds, props, and contests. BetOnline.ag continues to be the #1 source for everything football. Head to their website or use your mobile device and make sure to sign up today to receive a 100% welcome bonus. That's double your initial deposit just for signing up. Don't forget to use the promo code NFL100. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Hey, Seahawk fans, if you do a lot of driving like I do, then you need to know about a fantastic new app called Get Upside. When you open an account on Get Upside, you can get 25 cents per gallon back every time you fill up at the pump. Over time, that kind of savings starts to add up. Some people are making as much as $200 to $300 per month in cash back with Get Upside, which not only makes it easy to save, but which also gives you multiple cash out options, such as direct payment to your bank account, PayPal, Amazon gift cards, and more available at any time. Now, when you open an account and use our special promo code touchdown, you can get a bonus 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents back per gallon. So don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Download the free Get Upside app. Use our special promo code touchdown when you sign up for your account and start saving every time your car or truck needs a fill up. That's Get Upside, available in the iTunes App Store or on Google Play. Use the promo code touchdown. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Tuesday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith, joined as always by Rob Rang. Typically, in our second segment on Tuesday, we're doing a little bit of a blast of the past on Throwback Tuesday, looking back at previous games against the upcoming opponent. But this week got thrown a bit for a loop yesterday. I was traveling pretty much all day trying to get back to Seattle from Minnesota, covering that game on Sunday, and had to go solo last night late. Now we need an opportunity to hear what the great Rob Rang has to say about Sunday's game. And I know from our conversation before recording today that you had a lot on your mind. So I'm going to give you the floor here on what stood out to you from Sunday's game. Obviously not a good one for the Seahawks for the most part. There were some positives, but I kind of want you to just spill everything that you're thinking here, what you saw in this game, your final thoughts.
Well, I certainly appreciate that wonderful introduction, Corbin. Thank you, sir. I think where I would start off with is that, I've been doing this for 20 years. And during that time, I have listened to the national media just butcher coverage of the Seahawks for a long time. And that's the reason why I've been able to stick around for 20 years, because I actually, like you, sir, watch the tape and know the Seahawks pretty well. And I thought that this matchup against the Minnesota Vikings was a really, really difficult one. You can go back and listen to our Wednesday matchups program where I basically said that I thought that Seattle's corners were going to get shredded, that this was going to be a game where you had to score an awful lot of points because the Minnesota Vikings certainly were going to do so. And so I would just say the same in the immortal words of Aaron Rodgers, the Green Bay Packers: relax. We are in week 3. You're 1-2. The Kansas City Chiefs are 1-2 as well. There's some really good football teams out there. And I thought the Minnesota Vikings were, again, just a very difficult matchup. And so I'll transition from that initial point to my second point. And that being that I would just say it like this. Again, during those 20 years of being in this business, one of the great joys I've had, besides working with you, of course, is also I was used to co-host a radio program in Seattle's KJR with Doug Farrar, and he wrote a book a few years back called The Genius of Desperation. And that's the thing, is I thought the Minnesota Vikings, an 0-2 team that I thought should have been 2-0, were desperate as it gets. And you don't think that Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson, everybody else, is getting the desperation that's out there right now, and that they recognize that if they lose to the 49ers, that they're not only going to be in last place, they're going to have 2 games between them and the third place team. So I think that this is a very desperate Seahawks team. And when Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson and Ken Norton Jr. are desperate, then I do think that is most likely to result in a significantly improved play this week against a team, frankly, the San Francisco 49ers, that I don't think is as good as their record. And I'll just save the rest of that conversation until a little bit later. I'm going to switch over and make another point about the cornerback position. I've been reading, again, lots of folks and seeing with my own eyes, of course, the fact that Trey Flowers especially struggled a little bit. I think that when the matchup against Justin Jefferson specifically was not one that Trey Flowers, with what Trey Flowers does well, his physicality, his length, but he doesn't have that quick twitch change of direction. He doesn't have that straight line speed, in my opinion. I know we ran in the 4.4s, the 40-yard dash, but there was a reason why Oklahoma State, he played safety rather than cornerback. And Justin Jefferson, I believe, is one of the elite young wide receivers in the game. I think that Kirk Cousins is a terrific quarterback as well. So I thought that it was a matchup that frankly screamed Minnesota being able to just eat up Seattle's secondary. However, the San Francisco 49ers, I don't think are quite that. I think that there's a lot of Seahawks fans out there who are hoping that Sidney Jones or maybe Bless Austin, maybe even the rookie Trey Brown is some savior who is going to suddenly save the Seahawks secondary and perhaps be Richard Sherman that Trey Flowers, unfortunately, in his own words, cannot be. But I do think, again, that this particular matchup against the 49ers, as we're going to discuss a little bit more later, that this does match up a little bit better for Trey Flowers. I think that Brandon Ayuk is a speed receiver, but DJ Reed can handle that. On the other side, Deebo Samuel, his game is physicality. Trey Flowers' game is physicality. Sidney Jones's game is quickness and speed, and he does not yet have the familiarity with Seattle's defense that Trey Flowers, now in his 4th year as a starter for the Seahawks, has already. So again, I am not so convinced that it is going to be suddenly the switch to Sidney Jones as the starter, is perhaps some have suggested. I think at minimum that you might be seeing, or instead, I shouldn't say at minimum, but I think that there's a very good chance that Seattle is going to use that cornerback by committee kind of approach that we talked about before, the same way they did at the right tackle position with Brandon Shell being out and Jake Curran and Jamarco Jones both splitting time, the linebacker position, the way that Jordan Brooks and Cody Barton both split time. I think that you are going to see Seattle sort of play a little bit more matchups at the cornerback position. So I think that Trey Flowers is still likely to play significant action, and I do not expect Sidney Jones to come in here and suddenly become a Pro Bowl corner that Seattle expects. If he had been, why hadn't he played the last 2 weeks at all? Why didn't Bless Austin play at all on defensive side of the ball, considering how much Seattle was struggling against Minnesota? And speaking of struggling against Minnesota, I think everybody has now referenced, some of the quotes that, attributed to DJ Reed as far as they out-schemed our ass. That was a scheme. That was scrap. I mean, that was acknowledging that their receivers, especially Jefferson, especially KJ Osborne, could run right on past Seattle. And if you watch the All 22, should the NFL actually allow us to watch the All 22, then you'll see that Quandre Diggs was often responsible for covering very far deep, and Osborne was pushing him way back, creating those huge spaces, not only for Jefferson and for Thielen, but obviously Conklin, the tight end, who had a spectacular performance. Give him credit. The Vikings did scheme the Seahawks. They did beat the Seahawks and give the Seahawks a little bit of heat because the fact that they failed to adjust. And so to me, that kind of comes back to allowing your players to play a more simplified game. I still believe the Seahawks have one of the most talented defenses in all of the league. They just look confused out there. They look like they didn't know what they were doing, what their teammates were doing. Allow them just to run and hit. Allow Jamal Adams to come off the edge the way he is at his best. Because if they don't, George Kittle will eat them alive. But if they can allow Adams to rush the quarterback, again, I don't think that the 49ers are all that they are being cracked up to be. So to me, those are my big takeaways. And finally, just commit back to the running game. The way that the Titans did when they were down and came back by running the football. The way the Minnesota Vikings kept doing when they were down and committed to the running game. The Seahawks can beat a lot of teams if they just stick with their running game. But if they play one-dimensional, they're going to lose to a lot of teams this season. And again, I think that they are one of the better teams in the NFL. I think you're going to see that here in 4 or 5 days.
Well, Seahawks fans better be hoping that they're going to be seeing that team. I'm not as optimistic as what you are. Maybe I think more highly of the 49ers, and we're going to have a chance to break down that matchup over the next couple of days. But I just think that this is a very urgent time right now for the Seahawks, and maybe that does bring out the best in this football team. We see a different defense out there, and I think the one thing you and I most certainly can agree on, you just talked about the schematics. I wrote an article about it this morning. I don't know what specific types of stuff that they had in their game plan for this game, but whatever they did, it just seemed like widespread disarray, widespread discontent, frustration, confusion, all of those terms. The number of times you saw Quandre Diggs wanting to rip his helmet off and just being visibly frustrated. And a lot of it was not his fault, but there's execution things going on elsewhere in the defense. And if you got a couple guys not doing what they're supposed to do, you are not going to stop an offense that has the talent that the Minnesota Vikings do. And so I see parallels to where this team was at middle of the season last year against the Buffalo Bills when they gave up 44 points in that game. And there was discussion about, you know what, we need to get back to the basics. We just aren't executing. There's too much on our plates right now. I get the sense that that's what we are seeing from the Seahawks team right now. Now, I don't know if there is a cure-all right now that they're going to be able to lean on. They were able to go out and get Carlos Dunlap last year, and that was his first game playing against Buffalo. But you really started to see how he impacted the pass rush. They just need their guys to execute better. They have the pieces in place. The cornerback spot is the one area that I don't know that I would agree with you necessarily on not making a change at this point just because of how much Flowers has struggled. But I understand the matchup perspective as far as him being a physical corner, those being his strengths. This might be a better matchup for him than what he had in Minnesota going against San Francisco's receivers. But ultimately, going back to the scheme stuff, I think simplifying things has to be the number one measure right now because you've got players openly talking about having concerns, questions about the scheme. If that's going on in week 3, you need to pull things back a little bit, say, okay, maybe we have that accountability meeting like we did after the Buffalo game last year. Let's figure out what we're supposed to do. And I hate making this reference, but it's almost like, you're putting a few of your NFL guys in a first grade classroom. It's Billy Madison too, hey, this is your job. Where are you supposed to be lined up? And then go up to the chalkboard. I'm supposed to be over here. Little things like that. They've got to do something because clearly not everybody's on the same page. And if you have that problem in the NFL, you are going to get toasted.
I think the Billy Madison reference is a good one. Anytime I have an opportunity to, just kind of mention like a Chris Farley or anybody else, one of the great talents who was passed way too soon, then I will certainly take that. But yeah, when I think of that movie, I think of Adam Sandler obviously playing Billy Madison, and one of his kind of heroic moments, peeing down his leg just to kind of show his support for his young friend. That's what it felt like some of the Seahawks were doing, is peeing down their leg because they were out of position. They were being asked to play that kind of first grade role a little bit. I don't want to see Jamal Adams in coverage. He's good there. He is outstanding rushing the passer. I don't want to see Carlos Dunlap dropping back into coverage. He's an incredible athlete at that size, but he is at his best rushing the passer. There's so many things that from an X and O standpoint, the X's and the O's always run the same speed on the whiteboard. But against legitimate NFL talent, you have to take advantage of what makes your players special. And that's the thing, is I think that the game that you just referenced, Corbin, against the Buffalo Bills last year, to me, that was the game that everybody's saying this is the worst loss in Seahawks history. I thought that one was every bit as bad. And maybe Seahawks fans out there have their masks too tight or drink too much, or I don't know what else they might be doing that has lost their short-term memory. But that was a horrific performance. I thought this was very similar performance, but we're only in week 3. This is the first 17-game season. Again, I think, and you haven't played a divisional opponent yet. So if they get the ship right, and I do believe they can, if they just put their players in positions to succeed, then I do think that they can right the ship a lot quicker than some of the national pundits out there are suggesting.
And I'm glad you mentioned the defensive linemen dropping back into coverage, because it's something that I have seen way too much in the first 3 games. No offense to Carlos Dunlap or Alton Robinson or some of those other defensive linemen. I don't want to see Rasheem Green 15 yards off the ball dropping back. That is not a strength in his game. So I do think they've been getting too comfy with the 5 defender fronts. They're going to have to mix things up, and that creates more opportunities for you to move that chess piece that is Jamal Adams around so that you can let him do what he's really good at, which is rushing the passer. That he's just not getting in a rhythm doing that right now because he's not getting opportunities. And when you have an elite player like that, you don't want to put one arm behind his back. And I feel like that's what they are doing right now. And you're doing that when you're dropping Carlos Dunlap back into coverage. Let the guy rush the passer. I think they're just overcomplicating things. They're trying to do too much. have a simplified game plan that fits your personnel well, and go out and play. Right now, everybody's a step slow because they're thinking too much. You and I, if we're podcasting, if I start thinking too much, I start talking like this. I can't operate. Players are the same way when they're trying to run plays and they're thinking too much. They're a step slow. They mess up their assignments. So get back to the basics. I really think that that's going to be critical for this team. Just like it was middle of last year, it's great to have a lot of different things you can do as a defense, but only if you can do them well. And right now, they aren't doing anything well. So you need to tighten things up a little bit, have a more simplified game plan. Let's really get good at a few things, be well prepared for this game, and I think you will start to see changes on the defensive side of the football for the better moving forward. When we come back in the third quarter, we are moving on from the Vikings game. We are done talking about it. It's over. It's in the past. We are throwing it in the trash can. It's on to the 49ers. We're going to look at Seattle's bitter NFC West foe. What's new? Look at their draft class and some key numbers after the first 3 games of the season. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain store to stock all the parts you need. So why endure often pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer, choosing the only brand their warehouse happens to carry? You have computers with access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. Save time and money when you use Rock Auto. Why choose to spend 30, 50, or even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or car dealership? Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to all your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car or truck. Right, Locked On in there. How did you hear about us box so they know we sent you? Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Seahawks podcast, Tuesday edition. I'm your host, Corbin Smith, joined as always by Rob Rang. We are officially moving on from that debacle that happened in Minnesota on Sunday. It's on to week 4, another tough road contest for the Seahawks against a very familiar rival, the San Francisco 49ers. They're still licking their wounds after a heartbreaking loss to the Packers. They came back from a big deficit, were able to take the lead inside the final minute. But there have been a lot of teams, Rob. There have been a lot of teams learned this lesson, unfortunately. You don't want to give Aaron Rodgers too much time, and they did. Rodgers had enough time to drive the Packers down. Mason Crosby nails a field goal to steal the win in San Francisco. So the 49ers are no longer undefeated, sitting at 2-1. They're in third place in the NFC West. This is a solid football team, but as you mentioned, the second quarter definitely have some flaws. I think some of it has to do with some of the personnel changes, not just this year, but the year before. There has been quite a bit of roster turnover, and they've had some turnover on their coaching staff as well that I think has been playing a role in the fact that even though they're 2-1, they have been up and down. They almost choked away their week 1 game against the Lions, for example. It's a team that's looked good in spurts. They also have looked bad in spurts.
Yeah, and I'm happy that you mentioned the loss of the coaching. I mean, the defensive coordinator, Robert Saleh, former Seahawks coach as well, now obviously is the head coach in the New York Jets. And anytime that you have a change at the coordinator position, then there is likely to be some struggles. Seattle certainly knows that very, very well. So I think that that's a logical spot to start. I think that you look at some of the other departures of this team, Richard Sherman, and he's been, of course, in the news a lot here lately. So going to be interesting to see where he winds up. Jason Verrett, their best corner from a year ago, is struggling with injuries as well. So he is a departure in a lot of ways also. So again, this is a San Francisco 49ers team that has some talent, but at the same time, I think that their 2-1 record is a little bit misleading. As you said, they almost choked away their first victory against the Detroit Lions team that, frankly, I think is among the worst in all of the NFL. They finished dead last in the NFC Central or NFC North, a year ago. They beat the Philadelphia Eagles 17-11, a team that the Philadelphia Eagles I didn't think looked very impressive against the Dallas Cowboys in their loss, just a couple of days ago. Monday Night Football. And then the Green Bay Packers, of course, as you mentioned, losing that game to the Packers. But I didn't think the Packers looked that good either. So, and that was the only game that they've actually played at Levi Stadium in Santa Clara. And so San Francisco is 0-1 at home. And so with Seattle going on the road, I don't think this is the daunting, matchup that maybe the last 2 weeks, frankly, have been for the Seahawks, and maybe even week 3 or the very first week against the Indianapolis Colts as well. So again, I think that this is a quality 49ers squad, but at the same time, I don't think that this is a dominant team, and I just don't see the difference makers that have been additions for this club. Alex Mack is now the team's starting center. He struggled a little bit in this game against the Green Bay Packers. Samson Ebukam, the pass rusher, a guy I've been a big fan of ever since his days back at Eastern Washington, and certainly with the Los Angeles Rams. You know the pass rushers that the 49ers have. Nick Bosa is a big-time player. Ebukam can absolutely play. To me, that is one of the scary pass rushers that the 49ers do have. But otherwise, Corbin, I look at this rookie class, and for all of the hype about Trey Sermon, it's still Jimmy Garoppolo as the primary starter. They might bring in Trey Lance to be able to come in. I said Trey Sermon a moment ago. I'll get to him in a second. They bring in Trey Lance, every now and then, and he certainly can complicate things. He's a dynamic athlete, a dynamic talent. I think that he someday is going to be a terrific quarterback, but I still believe it's going to be the Jimmy Garoppolo show, and that is part of the reason why, along with the struggles that the 49ers have had, the running back, speaking of Trey Sermon, as well as Elijah Mitchell, their other rookie running back, because they've had so many issues at the running back, so many injuries at running back. Again, that is one of the reasons why I think that this 2-1 49ers team that has only beaten two teams that finished with 6-11, 5-11 records a year ago, that they're not quite as good as their record suggests.
Yeah, I look at that draft class. We'll get to that in a moment, but you mentioned the additions. Alex Mack is getting to be an older player. I believe he's 36 or 37. So this is not a guy that is in the prime of his career anymore. At one point, he was one of the better centers in football, but looked like he was getting up there age-wise in the game against Green Bay the other day. Ebukam is a solid rotational guy that can get after the quarterback a little bit, can drop back into coverage, has some positional versatility. Josh Norman was signed late because of the injury to Jason Verrett, and he's now dealing with an injury. Mohamed Sanu is well past his prime. He played a decent amount of snaps last week, but not a big-time threat anymore at this stage of his career. And Arden Key is a former second-day pick for the Raiders that ended up only lasting a few seasons there, and he's played in 3 games, has made a few plays, but has never really been able to fulfill his potential. Even at the college level, was kind of an underachiever given his athletic talents and his size. And so those were the additions they made. Didn't really have any splashy moves like they did the year before when they traded for Trent Williams, who still is, in my opinion, the best left tackle right now in the game. I watched him just absolutely demolish a defensive player for the Packers on a touchdown run for the 49ers the other night. He can do everything. That's been a fantastic addition. He was worth every penny they gave him on his new contract this offseason. But I feel like the additions they've made, the turnover with the coaching staff and stuff, I don't know that this is a roster that is as talented as it was 2 years ago. I think it's definitely better than last year because they don't have all the players out with injuries, except for the backfield. They've had a number of injuries at running back, but they're much healthier overall. But this is a draft class. You just look at it. Aaron Banks, their second rounder out of Notre Dame, hasn't played any games. He's been battling injuries. Trey Sermon's been banged up, had a concussion. Elijah Mitchell, their 6th-round running back, has been banged up. Jalen Moore hasn't been playing significant snaps. He's a backup offensive lineman. Ambry Thomas has gotten a few snaps in the secondary, but they don't have a lot of difference makers, at least right now, from this draft class. Lance has a chance to be a really good quarterback in this league, just not quite ready to be the full-time guy, which is why Jimmy Garoppolo is still the starter. And let's look at some stats here real quick. Inside the numbers, starting on offense, I've actually felt like looking at the numbers that this is a team that there's more to be concerned about with them on offense than defense, which is not what I was expecting to see. But they've had 7 passes of 20-plus yards, which is tied for the 6th fewest in the NFL. That does not surprise me. Jimmy Garoppolo is not known as a deep ball passer. That is not a strength in his game. They don't necessarily have the burners to get downfield either. This is a team that's going to be methodical with their drives, and that includes the run game as well.
It does. And as you just mentioned, that's not really Jimmy Garoppolo's game. Now, he can absolutely pick you apart. If Seattle plays off coverage the way they did against the Minnesota Vikings, then Jimmy Garoppolo can do the exact same thing that Kirk Cousins did to the Seahawks. I do believe, however, that the lack of elite straight line speed, the lack of playmaking wide receivers should allow Quandre Diggs to be able to play a little bit closer, and that's going to allow all of Seattle's defensive backs to play a little bit tighter in coverage. And so, to me, that's going to be one of the things that I love that you mentioned this, the 7 passes of 20-plus yards, tied for 6th fewest in the NFL. Again, considering that this is a team that is 2-1, and then it had some big explosive performances against the Packers and certainly against Detroit in the opener, I think that people might expect that they had a little bit more of an explosive passing game than they have had so far. And to that point, another statistic I think that really jumps out and is both a good thing for the 49ers, but I also think hints at some of their issues, is the fact that of their 11 touchdowns that they've scored so far, all 11 of them have been scored by somebody else. And so that is concerning for the defense. You obviously have to cover everybody. And, you and I, of course, are huge fans of George Kittle, huge fans of Kyle Juszczyk and all that. But at the same time, it also suggests that perhaps outside of George Kittle, that the 49ers don't have that guy that the Seahawks have, of course, with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. I think Gerald Everett showed some really encouraging signs in that loss to the Vikings. I don't know that the 49ers have that guy. And again, that's one of the reasons why I think the Seahawks could take full advantage of that.
Looking at a few more stats that I think are critical on offense. This one doesn't surprise me because the 49ers have been banged up in the backfield, but they are near the bottom of the league, averaging 3.6 yards per carry. You can't take this run game lightly because of Kyle Shanahan's ability to scheme it up and create extra gaps using motion pre-snap and things of that nature. And they're going to be healthier in the backfield this week. Raheem Mostert's out for the year, but it sounds like Elijah Mitchell's got a chance to play. They just got Trey Sermon back. So they've got a couple young backs that they believe can get the job done, and they've got the right scheme. So I think that number's a little misleading. I expect them to be a difficult team to defend running the football. They are the only team in the league that has scored a touchdown every time they've been in the red zone. So they're first in percentage, red zone percentage, 100%, the only team that's still there after 3 games. And they're also pretty good on third down, 47% completion or conversion rate on third down, which ranks 7th best in the NFL, going against a Seahawks defense that has really struggled on third down. So that may be an area that the 49ers can take advantage of the Seahawks.
Oh, absolutely could. As we just talked about, I mean, Seattle needs to change their defensive approach. And if they cannot slow down the running game, well, then you can throw every other statistic out the window, because, that's one of the things that we have seen. Even teams that cannot throw the ball consistently, if they can run the ball and be two-dimensional, they leave the defense on its heels, and it's just so much easier to do. So, yes, priority number 1, as is almost always the case, should be stopping the running game, especially when you're going against Kyle Shanahan, the San Francisco 49ers. Switching to the defensive side of the ball, the one statistic that I thought, or actually 2 statistics, if I was going to combine them, that I think bears notice here is the fact that the 49ers do have 17 tackles for loss through just 3 games. So obviously they have some penetration, that they are able to create some big plays behind the line of scrimmage. And usually if you're one of the best in tackles for loss, you're also one of the best in terms of sacks, especially when you got a guy like Nick Bosa coming now healthy this year, as well as Arden Key, as well as, some of the other pass rushers we talk about, Ebukam, et cetera, et cetera. But they only have 20 quarterback pressures at this point, and that's kind of surprising. They only have a 5% sack rate. That's 21st in the NFL. Considering how high or how much they were ahead of some of their opponents in those first 2 victories, you would have thought that they would have more in that regard. So again, to me, those are some things that Seattle is going to have to be able to run the football and to be able to slow down that pass rush, be able to slow down some of those tackle for loss opportunities, and then go back to what Seattle did very effectively before with a little bit of play action passes. I think, to me, that these numbers are just indicative of the fact that Fred Warner is a superstar at linebacker, quite possibly the best linebacker in all of the NFL. And so you have to be able to try and slow him down a little bit. But if the Seahawks are able to do so, again, I think that this is a game that is very, very winnable.
And a couple other stats that jumped out to me looking at their defense. 4.7 yards per carry given up against the run, which is fourth highest. And so, as you mentioned, you want to be able to run the ball. And that might be part of the reason their pass rush has not been able to get going, is teams are having success running the football on them. And that's prevented those pass rushers from really being able to pin their ears back. So that's certainly something to keep an eye on going into this game. And 70%, that is the touchdown percentage for opponents in the red zone. That is the sixth worst in the NFL. Seattle still got one of the better red zone offenses in the NFL. So that is certainly an area that should be an advantage for the Seahawks, especially with the weapons they have. Going against a 49ers secondary that's had a lot of turnover. They've had some injuries, losses in free agency. And so we'll be breaking down that matchup, I'm sure, on tomorrow's show. But certainly the red zone's been an area where the Seahawks have been very effective. Even on defense, they've been fairly effective when they've got pushed down to the red zone. They just had so many of those long drives that it still has hurt them that they have given up field goals. But the Seahawks should have an advantage in that capacity going into this matchup. Betting on the NFL doesn't have to be a guessing game if you listen to the new Locked On Bets podcast hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. Get daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favored picks, and Lee Sterling's lock of the day. Follow the Locked On Bets podcast brought to you by betonline.ag, wherever you get podcasts. You can follow me on Twitter at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Check out Locked On Seahawks on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and the new Odyssey app. That's AUDACY. Coming up on Wednesday, as always, one of our favorite shows of the week. We're going to be breaking down all the key matchups to watch as the Seahawks and 49ers rekindle their nasty NFC West rivalry. Coming up on Sunday, we'll be looking at 3 matchups when the Seahawks are on offense and 3 matchups when they are on defense. You won't want to miss it. As always, thanks for listening in. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.